These fortifications that could have put the likes of Julius Caesar to shame were manned by 5 infantry.
Bruh, I'm saying, bruh, Caesar tactics, bruh. Bruh. All right, so yeah, behind on the series, one of my members was asking me to continue with this series. So here we are.
The French have decisively won at Rocroi, and that has swung the pendulum of the 30 Years' War yet again. Their Swedish allies, commanded by Torstensson, have recovered from their earlier defeats and are now attacking the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, advancing further than even their legendary king Gustavus Adolphus. But is that enough to end the war? The Battle of Freiburg is going to prove that more blood has to flow.
Shout out to Brilliant for
I'm just skipping.
Rocroi was one of the most serious defeats the Habsburgs suffered during the 30 Years' War. It now seemed that nothing could stop Condé from taking over the Spanish Netherlands, as his opponent Jean de Bec's Spanish army was much smaller than that of the French prince. However, the Spanish Netherlands was a country of many dozens of fortified cities, so all Bec needed to do was reinforce the city Condé was going to attack. The latter went for Thienville, in the hopes of cutting the Spanish Netherlands from the Habsburg territory to the south. Bec managed to sneak in reinforcements before Condé besieged Thienville on June 16, 1643. This allowed the city to withstand a 2-month siege. The campaigning season was coming to an end, so Condé abandoned the siege and returned to France. The leader of the Dutch Republic, Frederick Henry, attempted to advance from the east, but Bec successfully bluffed him into thinking that the Spaniards received fresh troops, which forced the former to retreat. Despite this minor improvement in the situation, it was clear to the Spanish king, Philip IV, that the situation in the Netherlands was untenable. He needed all his troops to fight off the uprisings in Portugal and Catalonia, so Bec would get no help. Philip also basically broke his alliance with his Habsburg cousin Ferdinand III and started peace negotiations with the Dutch Republic. Back west, the Swedish commander Torstensson was slow to exploit his recent decisive victory at Breitenfeld. In November of 1642, he besieged Leipzig and sent Königsmark towards Westphalia to distract the imperial forces in that area. The fall of Leipzig a month later was a serious blow to the Elector of Saxony, John George. Torstensson's troops took Chemnitz in late December and started marching towards the crucial fortress of Freiburg, besieging it in early 1643. Meanwhile, the loser of the Battle of Breitenfeld, Archduke Leopold Wilhelm, had returned to Vienna, leaving his army under Piccolomini to be reformed at Reconitz. The latter was incredibly effective, and by January had 14,000 men available to help Freiburg. Indeed, Piccolomini's advance towards the fortress forced Torstensson to go into winter quarters. Piccolomini returned to Bohemia and was inexplicably removed from command in favour of Gallus. The campaign was renewed in late March as Torstensson attempted to invade Bohemia. A long series of maneuvers, marches and countermarches between his army and that of Gallus began and ran well into October, when Torstensson was able to reach Brunn and raided the area. His hope was that he might receive support for an attack from the largely Protestant Transylvania. Simultaneously, the Swedish commander sent a force under Königsmark to raid Franconia and then Saxony, in hopes that it would force the Imperials to divide their forces, while Gallus ordered Krakow to march into Pomerania via Brandenburg to weaken Sweden's hold over the region. Supported by a small Polish detachment, Krakow managed to take a few settlements. Gallus decided to reinforce him with cavalry under Puckheim, but Torstensson was able to destroy that group around Troppau. At the same time, Königsmark was commanded to engage Krakow, and by the end of September, the imperial force was pushed into neutral Poland. Back in Moravia, Torstensson, who didn't get any help from Transylvania, lost all of his momentum besieging Jägendorf, and as Oxenstierna was planning to invade Denmark, he called the commander back north. Despite being Protestant and starting the 30 Years' War on the same side, Denmark and Sweden were natural rivals. The success of Sweden made Danish King Christian IV increase the tax for trade passing through the straits. Word leaked out that the Danes were negotiating an alliance with the Habsburgs, and that made the conflict that would later be known as the Torstensson War inevitable. Oxenstierna's plan was for Marshal Horn to attack from the north, Admiral Fleming to secure the Baltic Sea, and Torstensson to strike Jutland from the south. Although Torstensson feared that his absence would allow Gallus to take back Silesia, Moravia, and Saxony, he strengthened the fortresses in the area and publicly announced that he was retreating to Pomerania in order to confuse the enemy. The march north started in mid-November, and in late November he entered the Danish holdings in Holstein. Torstensson occupied a number of fortresses, and by January 20th, 1644, the Swedes were ready to invade Jutland. Leaving some troops to besiege Gluckstadt, Torstensson moved the rest to the narrow channel separating the mainland from the island of Funen, while Horn took the provinces of Halland and Scania, save for Malmö. Both Swedish generals needed Fleming to win the naval battle to take the Danish capital, but Christian took command of the fleet and defeated the Swedes in a number of naval engagements between February and July, most importantly at Kolbura Haida, in the aftermath of which Fleming was killed and the Swedish fleet was blockaded at Kiel.
Damn. Honestly, nothing. This is very slow. I'm not gonna lie. Very slow compared to the last episodes that we have seen.
Simultaneously, Imperial commander in Westphalia, Hatzfeld, began threatening Torstensson from the southwest, and Gallus appeared from the southeast in July. The Swedish commander left Vranjo to secure Jutland and advanced south rapidly with what troops he had, using scorched earth tactics while retreating back to his initial positions. Gallus's troops suffered from the lack of supplies, and he wasted months worried that the Swedes might cross the Elbe. At the same time, Königsmark was sent south, drawing away Hatzfeld. The caution the imperial commanders employed played against them, as Sweden entered an alliance with the Dutch, and their united navies finally defeated Christian at Fehmarn, crippling the Danish navy in the process. Although no major battles were fought between the Swedes and the Imperials in 1644, Gallus's mismanagement, famine, desertions, and plague reduced his troops to a few thousand, and the Habsburg army basically ceased to exist. An alliance between Sweden and Transylvania was signed, with the prince of the latter, George I Rákóczi, was eager to support Torstensson's march against Vienna. However, we need to leave Torstensson for now and focus on the events in the west. The defense of the Holy Roman Empire in the Rhine region was mostly left to the Elector of Bavaria, Maximilian I, and his army, commanded by Franz von Mercy, managed to effectively destroy the French army under Ranso at Tuttlingen on November 24, 1643. This balanced the decisive French victory at Rocroi and gave Bavaria the initiative. After wintering in the area, Mercy took Ubelingen in May and then besieged Hottenwil, planning to starve it out. This gave the new French commander of the theatre, Henri Turenne, time to organize his forces. Although he had 10,000 troops, mostly made up of Germans from Weimar, against 20,000 commanded by Mercy, Turenne crossed the Rhine on June 1st in 2 columns. By June 4th, Turenne was at Höfingen, and even defeated a small Bavarian detachment. Despite that, the French just didn't have enough troops to fight and started their retreat. Mercy left a small group to continue the siege and moved to the west, besieging Freiburg on the 26th, while Turenne set a camp at Betzenberg and started a series of skirmishes, killing a few hundred imperial soldiers. However, all that was in vain, as Freiburg fell on the 29th. It seemed that all the French gains of 1638 were about to be reversed. Yet, the French Prime Minister, Cardinal Mazarin, had another idea. Duke of Orleans Gaston was assigned to lead the army in Flanders, and Condé
where is the battle?
To the Rhine theatre and appointed as the commander of the German army.
Where is the battle?
His 10,000
Oh my gosh.
reaching him on August 2nd, just 13 days after the appointment.
Where is the battle, bro?
Mercy was forced to lead small detachments at Freiburg and Hottenwil. He now had 17,000 troops against 20,000 under Condé. Mercy probably knew that the usually rash Condé was going to attack directly, and he also lacked horses, which made a retreat difficult. So he started creating a fortified position to the southwest of Freiburg, an area that was favourable for this tactic, with its river valleys, hills and forests. The Schönberg Hill, which was impossible to form a line formation on, was central in this plan. Mercy's north was secured due to the river Dreisem, while on his flank,
here it is.
His troops erected a line of palisades from Haslach to the western slopes of the Schönberg Hill.
Oh shit, we got Caesar tactics.
The Moosveld Forest to the west. A sconce and a star fort were placed on the western edge of the hill to make scaling it even more costly. These fortifications, that could have put the likes of Julius Caesar to shame, were manned by 5 infantry.
Bruh, I'm saying, bruh, Caesar tactics, bruh. But way more insane.
4,000 or so soldiers, supported by 5 guns. The imperial left was made up of 1,000 or so footmen, but that was enough, as they were defending a narrow passage, the Bahnstein, between Schönberg Hill and another forest to the east. That pass was also blocked by obstacles, but in general it wasn't expected that the French were going to attack here, as bypassing Schönberg would have their left flank open to attack. A small group was stationed on top of the hill to coordinate the 2 wings divided by the hill. The majority of the imperial troops, some 12,000, stayed in the main camp to the south of Haslach. The French knew of these preparations. Turenne and Condé argued on the best course of action, and this was the precursor of the debates that would happen within the French military community for the next decades and centuries. Turenne was advising not to engage Mercy's remarkable position directly, and to move north and then west, cutting the imperial supply line to the north of Freiburg, which would have forced the Bavarian commander to retreat east, leaving his rear vulnerable to the charges of the superior French cavalry. However, Condé was in charge, and he believed that the Bavarians could be defeated with a frontal attack, so he overruled Turenne and other generals and ordered a direct assault on the 3rd of August. Turenne was sent to reconnoitre the enemy defences and found the Bahnstein Pass. He was instructed to advance here with 5,000 footmen, while Condé would command 5,000 infantry and a few hundred cavalry against the imperial right. 3,000 or so horsemen defended the left side of Condé's forces, and a few guns were set up on a small hill behind his positions, with the rest of the army in reserve between the 2 French commanders. The attack was to start at 5 PM, which was another controversial decision. Turenne's forces had to march 4 hours before the fight, which tired them, and it was just hours before sunset, meaning that the French had mere hours to win the battle. Condé's offense started from the village of Ebringen against the village of Born. This was the weakest link in the imperial fortifications, since other redoubts weren't able to assist directly, and the French led by Espenard were able to overcome the wall despite enemy fire. Scaling the walls broke their formation, however, and the imperial fire on the other side of the wall forced Condé's forces to retreat down the hill. This time, the French leader ordered D'Espenand to attack the southeast portion of the wall, with Tournon being sent against the southwest. Once again the wall was taken, and once again the French were greeted by Bavarian fire. D'Espinon's already battered troops weren't able to resist for long. Most of them retreated downhill, while a group under Persson dispersed in the forest to the east. Soon, Tournon's units, who were disheartened by the Allied rout, fell back to Ebringen. The French were taking heavy casualties.
I'm not gonna lie. This episode was very underwhelming. Very underwhelming. I'm not even gonna lie. Like, I after the last episode, I really thought that we were gonna get a lot. But wow, this is just underwhelming as shit.
But not nearly enough to change Condé's mind. The French general ordered
the one thing though that was noteworthy was the fortifications. That is just wild.
Leaving only cavalry in reserve. For the third time, his troops surmounted the walls. However, this time, Bavarian cannons further north were finally turned and used against them, killing many. On the other hand, the defenders of Bull were running low on ammunition, and the troops, led personally by Condé, reached and attacked them. Simultaneously, Persson's regiment surprisingly managed to reform in the woods and joined the fight against the imperial defences from the east.
Were the French coming in? What?
Slaughtered.
The French are clutching, bruh.
Meanwhile, Turenne's flank reached its position earlier than expected, headed by a vanguard of 1,000 musketeers under Roqueservier. Mercy's outpost sent word of their approach and informed the commander. Turenne probably knew that he was facing a minor force and attacked at 4:15 p.m, eager to break his foe before they were reinforced. The initial French advance pushed the defenders back, but Mercy, who considered this attack to be more dangerous than the one that was being openly prepared by Condé, arrived in time with 5,000 soldiers to push Roqueservier back, wounding the French leader in the process. Turenne's situation was bad. He had the numerical advantage, a cavalry reserve and artillery nearby, but wasn't able to use any of that due to the narrowness of the passage.
Yeah.
Furthermore, he had to attack immediately in order to tie up enough of Mercy's forces to give Condé's attack a chance. So he moved to the front line and led the offense himself. With no room to maneuver and use their advantages, the French were suffering heavy casualties, but continued to fight. At that moment, Condé's troops once again were moving north, this time to take Sternschanze. Reuchenberg, who was left in command by Mercy, mustered 2,000 and moved south to reinforce the redoubts on Schönberg. The two sides skirmished for an hour, but Reuchenberg, who clearly was a weak commander, decided that he couldn't defend the position without the southernmost defences and had to retreat to the main camp.
Bruh, the Spanish are absolutely...
An opportunist would have followed, but his troops were in terrible shape, and it was now dark and raining, so he called it a day after taking Sternschanze.
Bruh!
The French now controlled Schönberg.
The French are just killing it!
Mostly due to Condé's personal bravery.
Yeah. MVP. He's MVP of this fight.
Fighting continued until 4 a.m, when Mercy was informed that the hill was lost. This meant that his rear might be open to an attack, so the Imperial commander disengaged and moved back to the camp, leaving Turenne in control of the passage. The French lost almost 3,000 troops on this day, most of them on Turenne's flank. Imperial casualties were around 1,000. On August 4th, using the fact that Condé's army was exhausted, Mercy moved his army to the east and ordered his troops to create another line of defence based around the hills of Loreto and Gipfel. The Imperials were now defended by the Dreisem to the north and east, with Freiburg providing cover for their northern flank. Most of their infantry was on the hills, with the rest of the footmen and cavalry in reserve near the village of Adelhausen. As there was now parity in the number of troops for both sides, Mercy was sure of victory. Condé took the main imperial camp on the same day, while Turenne positioned his troops in Merzhausen. The French used the day to rest and tend to the wounded. There was still no agreement between their commanders, as Turenne wasn't eager to go on another frontal attack. Condé, however, was sure that Mercy's retreat on the 3rd was a rout, and that the fortifications on the hills were a bluff. The commander devised a plan to take the fortifications. His troops would charge up the Loreto
Bro, why
Hill
is my
and
quality...
climb up
Yo. 380. That is so criminal. What? I was like... Something is weird with this video and I can't put my finger on it.
while Turenne was to use the cover of the Becker Wood to cover his advance and then take Vornhalde, which would make the defense of the hills untenable and give the French victory.
Bro, you know when you hear this music, you know it's funny? Because this music is fucking copyrighted, so every time you hear me say, oh, when you hear this music, you have no idea what I'm talking about.
The French attack was supposed
because I usually have to remove it.
Yet Condé and Turenne were suddenly informed of movement to the south of Vornhalde. Both commanders rode to their extreme right to personally scout the situation, as the imperial presence in the area would mean that Turenne's right flank might be in danger and their plans were no good. However, Despinard, who was to command the French movement towards the Loreto Hill, didn't receive news of that, and his troops were too close to Mercy's forward redoubts. A group of dismounted dragoons was defending this position, and they opened fire at the advancing French. Although this wasn't the position Despinard had to attack, he ordered a unit to take it. In response, Mercy reinforced the redoubt. Despinard had to send in even more reinforcements, and the battle started. Lechelle's musketeers, tasked with taking the Becker Wood, thought that it was the signal to attack, but the Bavarian troops were still not distracted, so most of the Frenchmen who exited the forested area were killed on sight. Dormont, who had to charge here, moved forward in confusion, but immediately was greeted by Imperial volleys. The French were stopped in their tracks. The Imperials then counterattacked, pushing Dormont downhill.
Oh, damn. Oh, that's not looking good.
Who was returning to his flank from reconnaissance, concentrated nearby forces and charged the advancing Bavarians, driving them away. The French commander then took over the troops of Dormont and moved against the enemy position at Vornhalde. This attack was met by overwhelming musket and cannon fire, killing and wounding many Frenchmen, missing Condé only by chance. Luckily for the retreating Condé, the French centre, led by Turenne, attacked the centre of the imperial fortifications, which forced Mercy to reinforce this position and allowed Condé and Despinard to disengage. The French lost more than 1,000 in that encounter battle, while Mercy's casualties were less than 300. Once again, Condé wasn't discouraged and ordered another attack. This time Turenne was going to divert enemy attention to the south, while Despinard would take Loreto Hill. This assault began at 3 PM. The French managed to scale the northern hill, but were promptly treated with bullets and cannonballs and were forced to fall back. The second wave was able to get closer to the redoubts, but once again was forced to run. The same fate awaited the third and fourth French waves, stubbornly sent uphill by Condé. The French commander decided to add another element to his attack. The third and fourth waves reformed and attacked the enemy fortifications from the west, while the dismounted dragoons, whose armour was heavier than those of the footmen, charged the Loreto Hill from the north. Initially that worked as intended, with the Bavarians being pushed back and losing the redoubt. However, Mercy had his own cavalry reserve, and it was sent forth to attack the French dragoons from the right. This stopped the French advance. Condé attempted to turn the tide by sending his last reserves into the fray, but that was countered by Mercy's last reserves. This was a desperate fight. Slowly but surely, the Bavarians started to gain an upper hand and pushed the French downhill. Luckily for Condé, Turenne still had some cavalry reserves, and they moved left, blocking the imperial pursuit. These horsemen defended the French footmen until nightfall. Conde lost another 2,000 men, bringing the total of his losses to 8,000, almost half of his army. The third day of the battle was the deadliest for Mercy, with more than 1,000 killed or wounded. Overall, he had lost 2,500 through 3 days.
Honestly, yeah, this is probably one of the most underwhelming reactions that I've done. I can't even lie.
Battle.
I really was expecting more.
Spent the 6th fortifying their camp, worried that Mercy, who now outnumbered them, was going to attack, but the latter proved to be too cautious, or maybe his army was also too battered to attack. Conde's bravery that gave him the brilliant victory at Rocroi was perfectly countered by Mercy, whose defensive strategy changed the balance of power in the war once again. But was that enough to save the empire? We will find out in the coming videos in this series, which will be released soon, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button.
Look, guys, if you're new to my channel, I assure you, my reactions are usually like this. It's just that this one just didn't really have anything much to react to. We'll go check out my other 30 years war reaction though, because trust me, it's a lot more like shit, bro. I can't even blame you if you didn't even decide to watch it. But if you did watch it though, and you are new, I mean, at that point, just subscribe. Usually, I always say at the end of my videos, if you like my reactions and you want to see more, like comment it and subscribe. But I mean, if you have any suggestions that I would definitely love to react to, definitely comment it. But like shit, bro, I don't even know if I should say that because, bro, this there was nothing to react. There's literally, you couldn't even see a reaction from me in the video. Like, I'm not gonna sit my ass here and just pretend like I did a whole reaction. Like, no, I really and truly did not. But whatever, dude. I mean, look, like I said, I have a whole portfolio of my reactions on my channel. Anyways, go check it out. Active viewers, like I said, if you have suggestions, you are active on my channel. Join my channel. Membership is only 99 cents a month. It's literally like I purposely made it cheap for my active viewers, and this is why I say active viewers and not any and everyone, because these are for the more dedicated viewers, of course, right? So far we have 8 members right now. As we get more members, I'm going to expand the perks in the future, but the main ones are suggestions are done quicker, early access to uploads, your comments are responded to with much more priority compared to others. Like I said, I have a bunch of stuff that I'm gonna be doing, like college, work, as I get more people on my channel, all that stuff, bruh. Anyways, man, thank you for watching and goodbye. Like and subscribe.